Hello, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this video is to take a look at Book 2 of Cry the Beloved Country and look at how these various themes and characters are developing through this story. First of all, in case you haven't noticed yet, Cry the Beloved Country is actually broken into 3 distinct books. So we have this kind of 3-book structure of the novel. In Book 1, we're really dealing with the tribal and family breakdown. And we see Khumalo worrying about his family. We see him leaving Dachsheni. We see that others have also lost family members. We see that the members of his own family don't talk to each other anymore. There's been no letters, no contact for a while. When he does find his sister, he finds that she's been supporting herself through prostitution and crime. She's addicted to alcohol. And that his brother has abandoned religious values and the family unity in favor of political speech and activism. We find that his son has become a thief. We learn that he's going to have an illegitimate grandchild, and that his brother and his nephew will even lie to save themselves, even if it means that their cousin and their nephew will be convicted. So you just have this complete tearing apart that is really emphasized through the events in Book 1. Now in Book 2, the camera draws back a little bit from this family and looks at crime among the black youth and the social problems of the city as a whole. And Absalom Khumalo becomes a sample in this case, where he represents way too many other young black men that have been through this same model, where they've been taken out of their tribal country and put into the big city and fallen victim to this kind of lifestyle. And the reader's awareness of all these social problems in Johannesburg grows just as Khumalo's does. Khumalo becomes our eyes. We also don't know what's going on in Johannesburg, and as he learns about them, so do we, as he goes through this search and this journey to find his son. We learn about the housing shortage that's created these terrible hardships and choices. We learn that more and more people are turning to crime as the unemployment is bad, and the opportunities and things, particularly for black youth, are almost non-existent. And then we start hearing about some of the other economic pressures on the city. There's a strike at the gold mine that's creating these kinds of economic pressures. So in general, Book 2 is more about the larger picture of what's happening in the entire countryside. In Book 2, you can start to see some interesting side-by-side comparisons of some of the characters. We have the 2 fathers, Stephen Khumalo and James Jarvis. One is poor, one is rich, one is black, one is white. One is very religious and relatively uneducated from this small poor village. The other one is a landowner who's very highly educated, extremely secure in his family, his self-esteem, his place in society. And then on the other side, we have Khumalo, who has this kind of insecure life, doesn't really know or have a lot of control over what's happening, and he loses a son to black crime, whereas James Jarvis loses a son to black crime. And notice that both of the men come together over their sons, and that they also share a common land. If you hadn't caught that detail, Jarvis's plantation is on the land that surrounds Khumalo's village, and Khumalo even remembers seeing young Arthur Jarvis when he was very little, and he said he remembers a very small, bright boy, and that fact that he remembers this small child makes it all the more heartbreaking that his own son has killed this other man's son. So Book 2 helps to set up these characters as parallel lives. We learn that each one is a type of sensitive person. They're very aware of the people around them, that they each have a family that they love and other people that look to them. They're both concerned beyond their own needs and wants, and each one does indeed lose a son. One loses a son to death, one to criminal activities, bad companionship, and consequences of that. We learn that each father grieves this loss dreadfully, and that each is going to be instrumental in trying to bring the blacks and whites together and at least put the seeds in of how this kinds of issues might be solved. Now, just like their fathers, Book 2 also sets us up with some interesting contrasts with the boys. We have Absalom Khumalo versus Arthur Jarvis. Again, you have this contrast of poor versus rich, black versus white. In Absalom Khumalo's case, he seems to be kind of aimless. He doesn't really have a goal. He doesn't have anything to do in the village, so he goes in the city. He seems to, from the stories we have, kind of wanders around the city and falls into this life of crime. It's not like he even chooses and says, hey, I'm going to go rob this house. It's just the people around him seem to sway him really easily, and he becomes involved with these criminal activities. And that he separates from everything that his father had taught him. His father was a minister and taught him this kind of compassion. He seems to kind of lose all of that. On the contrast, Arthur Jarvis here comes from this wealthy family, from this plantation and city, and from the descriptions we have, he seems incredibly focused and goal-oriented, that we know that he really wanted to improve other people's lives, that he was opening schools and facilities to try to do this, he was writing papers to try to persuade other people, and that he also rejects his father's views of apartheid, where his father subscribes to the old guard that everything should be separate. Arthur Jarvis is actually looking at ways to change some of those rules and to improve the lives of the black majority who has no power under the apartheid system. Now, Book 2 continues to illustrate some of the major themes of the book. We see the deterioration, particularly of the black men's character in the slums of the white men's cities. That as they get taken out of their village, they lose those connections, those family life, those values, and there's nothing really to replace it once they get into the city system. That's the loss of that stabilizing influence, and then we see what's the answer to that is the possibility of rebuilding the family through faith, through compassion, and through love to make these connections back again. Some of the other themes that continue to play out in Book 2 include the consequences of fear and discrimination, that close relationship between the land and the people and what happens when that's lost. To some extent, the role of chance or accident in life. There's some people who just happen to be there at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the right time. And this turning back to comfort of spiritual values when times are changing. Book 2 also continues with this idea of social problems in the city. We learn that outside of the city, the natives are being forced onto land that they can't farm anymore. It's too barren, it won't produce crops. We learn that the workers are forced down into the mines where the pay is really poor and working conditions are very are horrible and dangerous. We learn that the city life basically equals a life of crime, that there's a breakdown of the families and the moral structure, a lack of jobs, no housing, and no services due to the apartheid rules. Now, one thing Book 1 and 2 have in common is this idea of fear being woven into everything. From the very openings of the story, we learn that Khumalo is afraid to open the letter because of the news it might have. He's afraid of what he might get lost or what happens to him in the city. He's in fear of what might have happened to his son. Gertrude's afraid of what her brother's going to think when he finds her. Absalom shoots the gun because he gets afraid, because Arthur scares him when he comes in, not because he intended to kill. Absalom's girl just seems to be afraid of everything. The whites in Johannesburg fear black crime and a black uprising, particularly when you have speakers like John Khumalo. The blacks fear retaliation if they try to do anything to make these changes. If they speak out or strike or boycott, they're worried about the police coming down on them. And John in particular is afraid of the police and the system and of getting arrested. And so that's the end. Hopefully you have a better understanding of how the events in Book 1 and Book 2 play together to set things up, and you just have a little bit of the story left to finish. So enjoy. That's the end. Good night.